WADR, promoting dialogue.
It's midday in Dakar. Good afternoon and many thanks for tuning into West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and around the world on WADR.org. Welcome to Newslink. Here are the top stories. Mali's Transition Assembly begins a 3-month session with a mission to examine 30 bills and proposals, among others. Lawmakers in Nigeria condemned the call for an interim government.
Interim government is not something that we should support, taking into consideration that our democracy is a young one. It is our duty to do everything within our strength to support the current democracy that we are enjoying.
In Liberia, nearly 30 political parties signed a peace pact ahead of the October 10th general elections to ensure a violence-free process.
Liberia is now on the threshold of a new democratic order. Having had many positive transitions, we are committed to a credible, free, fair process.
And authorities in Cameroon decried the impact of frequent fighting on reconstruction efforts. Please stay with us for details of these stories and more.
Here is James Ajapon with Newslink.
Glad you could join us on this edition of the news. Let's begin with Mali, as the Transitional Assembly this week opened the ordinary session with a focus on the referendum and the upcoming general elections, as well as the country's fight against terrorism. Around 30 bills and proposals will be examined during the 3-month session. In addition to the proposed tax, there are also plans for the monitoring of government action, field missions by the commissions, as well as capacity building sessions. Imoedit has more details.
Chaired by Colonel Malik Jor, president of the CNT, the ceremony in Bamako recorded the presence of the Prime Minister, Shogel Kokala Maiga, several members of the government, administrative authorities, and representatives of the diplomatic corps. For Colonel Jor, this session opens at a time when Mali is seeking to adopt a new constitution after several attempts to modify the text by previous authorities. The President of the Assembly promised to invite all the living forces of the country, all socio-political organs, and all Malians, home and abroad, to appropriate the new draft constitution. According to him, the date for the constitutional referendum will soon be announced after consultation with the Election Management Authority and other electoral actors. Regarding the evolution of the security situation, the president of the CNT maintained that the Malian armed forces are pursuing the offensive pace against armed terrorist groups. He, however, regrets that ECOWAS is still at odds with the country by maintaining sanctions earlier imposed, despite all the steps taken by Bamako. The second extraordinary session will enable the CNT to perfect its rules of procedure, taking into account, in particular, the arrival of additional members and improve the functioning of the institution.
Imoedit filed that report. Let's get to Nigeria, where lawmakers have added their voice to those condemning calls for an interim government following the disputed presidential election of February 25th. The country's secret police, the DSS, had raised an alarm over alleged plot by some yet-to-be-named group of persons planning to cause a break in the country's democratic rule by having an interim government. Usman Umar in Abuja tells us more.
The results of the February 25 presidential election has since become a subject of litigation, but because the system allows for the inauguration of a president-elect, regardless of the contestation of the election results, many groups with links to political parties or candidates have been holding protests. The latest, however, is the rather alarming hint by the Department of State Services, DSS, that some people are planning to get an interim government installed. However, concerned citizens, including these lawmakers from the lower chambers of the National Assembly, have been speaking against these plans. Uyime Idem is a lawmaker from Akwa Ibom State.
Interim government is not something that we should support, taking into consideration that our democracy is a young one. It is our duty to do everything within our strength to support the current democracy that we are enjoying, to strive and then stay.
Also speaking on the matter, Sergius Ogun and Nkeruka Onyejocha agree that interim government is not known to Nigeria's constitution.
the security agencies should do their work. If you are asking for a different government that is not known to law, it's treasonable felony.
Nigeria is bigger than individuals. You must have a country for you to rule. And if you are saying these kind of things, and you do not know who is interpreting it the way they are interpreting it.
Nigerians have the characteristics, when they lose out, they want things to be taken back to the melting pot so that everybody will put his spoon and try his luck. This will not happen.
After over 2 hours of extensive deliberation, the lawmakers resolved to summon the relevant security agencies to swing into action immediately and save the country's democracy. For Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, Usman Umar reporting from Abuja.
Meanwhile, the Nigerian army has called for calm, particularly among residents of the South-South region after video clips of several UN heavy-duty trucks went viral on social media. The uproar followed the unusual presence of the peacekeeping vehicles and hardware in Benin, the Edo state capital. For many social media users in the region, the sighting of the trucks last week perhaps signals chaos of war, a notion the army refuted.
Fresh and breaking news all the time. Hear it first as the news breaks, only on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
If you are just tuning in, this is Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM. Away from Nigeria, nearly 30 political parties in Liberia Tuesday signed an agreement known as the Farmington River Declaration, aimed at ensuring a peaceful electoral process. Signed under the auspices of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, and the National Elections Commission, NEC, the pact now requires political parties to institute measures that will prevent electoral violence and impunity and promote peace. WADR's Darlington Pogba in Monrovia reports.
The parties agreed that whenever political conflicts occur, they will address said conflicts through mediation or legal means and not to revert to violence. Speaking during the signing ceremony in Magibi County, President George Weah said the conduct of a peaceful election in October will demonstrate the readiness for Liberians to sustain the peace.
Political leaders are sending a strong signal to our partisans, supporters, and well-wishers and followers, and also to the entire world of our unflinching commitment and preparedness to conduct peaceful, fair, and credible democratic presidential and legislative elections on October 10 this year.
In remarks, the head of the main opposition, who doubles as former Vice President Joseph Boakai, committed the political parties to upholding the Farmington Declaration of Non-Violence.
By ensuring the elections are violence-free, simply because people want to be. Liberia is now on the threshold of a new democratic order, having had many positive transitions. We are committed to a credible, free, fair process.
Meanwhile, ECOWAS Commission President Omar Aliyu Toure pledged the Commission's continued support to the Liberian electoral process.
These observers will continue to provide feedback from their observations in order to enhance a free, fair, transparent, and peaceful election. ECOWAS has zero tolerance for violence. All perpetrators will be identified and punished in accordance with the law.
Many believe that the signing of the Farmington River Declaration is a crucial step ahead of the conduct of the October 10, 2023 general elections. For Newslink on WADR, I am Darlington Pogba reporting from Monrovia.
In other news, Ghana's opposition National Democratic Congress, NDC, has been called upon by the ruling party to be honest in its assessment of the country's economic situation. The governing New Patriotic Party, NPP, said the call is given its excellent handling of the Ghanaian economy, which the NDC has condemned to score political points ahead of the 2024 polls. The NPP National Chairman, Stephen Intim, in an address on Tuesday, consequently urged party members to assist in spreading the party's goodwill. Intim mentioned a few steps taken by President Akufo-Addo's presidency to economically sustain Ghana, but blamed the current crippling economic crisis on several factors including the COVID-19 pandemic and the Russia-Ukraine war.
A 30% cut of the salaries of the president, the vice president, ministers and heads of state-owned enterprises. 2, a discretionary 30% cut to central government spending has been implemented. A 50% cut in fuel coupon allocations for all political appointees and heads of government institutions. A 30% cut in fuel coupons allocations for all political appointees and heads of government institutions to ensure efficient use of energy resources. D, suspension of all foreign travels except pre-approved statutory travels or critical travels. Moratorium on the establishment of new public sector institutions has been instituted. The last one is there's a freeze on tax waivers for foreign companies, while tax exemptions for companies in the free zones will be reviewed. The NDC must desist from the habit and strategy of deceit in its quest for power. The lies and deceit must be eschewed.
Stephen Intim is the national chairman of Ghana's governing New Patriotic Party, NPP. In Benin, the Union of Media Professionals came out yesterday to denounce the slowness in the preparation and distribution of press cards. For more than a year now, several journalists have submitted their applications to receive the document, but so far nothing has happened. The situation has caused indignation within the union. It calls on the High Authority for Audiovisual and Communication to take urgent measures so that media professionals have their cards before the commemoration of the International Day of Press Freedom on May 3rd. Take a listen to Zakiat Latunji, President of the Union of Media Professionals of Benin, speak more on the issue.
Dans notre pays, en effet,
in our country, only those in possession of a press card can be considered journalists, as shown by the provisions of the 2015-07 Code of Information and Communication in the Republic of Benin, but also by the judicial practices that led to the detention of our colleague Inya Sosu for 10 months in the civil prison of Cotonou, simply because he did not have a press card. Numerous judicial decisions against media professionals justify this. The Union of Media Professionals of Benin is concerned about the slowness noted at the High Authority of Audiovisual and Communications in issuing the press card, despite the files being submitted within the deadline, and the Commission has finished its work for several months now.
That was Zakiat Latunji, President of the Union of Media Professionals of Benin. We cross over to Burkina Faso, where reactions have trailed the recent announcement of the over 7 billion CFA francs, or $12.2 million collected under the Patriotic Support Fund. Set up by the transitional government in January 2023, the Burkina Faso minister in charge of the economy, Abubakar Nakana, disclosed that the fund is part of the fight against terrorism. The generated revenue will specifically support and accompany the action of the Volunteers for the Defense of the Fatherland, VDP, the Army Auxiliary Unit of about more than 50,000. While this is a remarkable success in the security sector, support for other crucial sectors such as education and health is being questioned. Yusuf Ouattara, a Burkina Faso public affairs commentator, comments in this chat with WADR.
The fund is specifically for volunteers. First, to fund the salaries, because you have 50,000 volunteers. In terms of salaries, this is 36 billion CFA a year. And also you need the equipment of those volunteers. And as you know, there are many international partners which don't want to fund Burkina and which don't want to support the volunteers because they think there are risks of human rights violation. So the fund is specifically for the volunteers and also the equipment. So there is a governance body that will oversight the collection and also the use of those funds. And there will be also audit of those funds when they will be used.
But are there concerns among Burkinabés that just maybe there might be issues of corruption or mismanagement? Because 7 billion in just 3 months isn't a small amount of money.
I think the mechanism that has been set up to govern and the use of those money, I think it's a very transparent system, because every month there's a statement. They give an account of the level of the fund, and this body, this mechanism will also have an oversight on the use of the money. I think Burkina people are trusting the governance mechanism of this fund, and that's why they are enthusiastic to contribute.
Now, Burkina Faso seem to be doing well in the security front with this massive support from the population. But do you fear for the future of education, knowing that millions of children are out of school, thousands of schools are closed, thousands of hospitals and health facilities across Burkina Faso are closed, and many more people, maybe in their millions, are out of reach and cannot access basic needs or assistance? What is the future of the sectors I just mentioned?
Yes, of course, it's difficult. So what we are managing now is much more emergency. So you have program in terms of emergency education. You have a program in terms of emergency health. So many sectors are actually under the formula of emergency. So Burkina is much more adapting now regarding some of the sectors. But as I say, security is the key, because if you have the security, then you have all the other sectors that will come.
You are listening to Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, 94.9 FM Dakar. Here's a reminder of our top stories. Mali's Transition Assembly begins a 3-month session with a mission to examine 30 bills and proposals, among others. Lawmakers in Nigeria condemn the call for an interim government. In Liberia, nearly 30 political parties signed a peace pact ahead of the October 10th general elections to ensure a violence-free process. And authorities in Cameroon decry the impact of frequent fighting on reconstruction efforts. Still ahead, we have our newspaper review, guest interview, and some sports updates. Kindly stay with us.
West Africa Democracy Radio. It's you speaking.
And finally, in other news, authorities in Cameroon have expressed concern about the impact of the fighting between separatists and the National Army on the rebuilding of the affected regions. For nearly 3 years, the reconstruction of basic infrastructures such as schools, health facilities, and homes has been hindered due to frequent conflict. Out of the thousands of homes and hundreds of public buildings damaged in the 7-year separatist conflict, less than 100 have been rebuilt. Let's join Abdullahi Hassan for more details.
On Tuesday, 50 school children in a broadcast on Cameroon state media sang in their classroom at the Cameroon Baptist Convention Inclusive Primary School to thank the government for rebuilding their school. The government repaired the school last year after it was damaged in 2018 during clashes between troops and separatists. But the school is one of only 60 rebuilt, while hundreds are abandoned. VOA, citing a social media post by the rebels, reports that the separatists have vowed to make the English-speaking Northwest and South regions a breakaway nation. The rebels say government schools and offices are legitimate targets as they are used by the French-speaking majority to suppress the minority, a claim the state has denied. The Cameroonian government in 2020 launched a reconstruction and development plan for the Northwest and Southwest regions, which targets the rebuilding of 12,000 private homes, schools, hospitals, bridges, and markets, all destroyed or damaged in the fighting. A total of $150 million was earmarked for the project, with Cameroon providing 70% of the funds, while the rest will be covered by international donors including the UN, France, and Japan, and private companies.
Abdullahi Hassan for that report.
This is the newspaper review. Stay on top of the news. Get the most important stories with added insight and concise review.
This is the newspaper review.
Up next, we have our press stories from Baju with WADR Sankole Janko.
Hello there, good afternoon, and welcome to this edition of the press review, coming to you from the smiling coast of Africa, the Gambia. Let's begin today's press review with the Standard newspaper, and the lead story reads, government advised to prioritize communication to avoid losing credibility. Court orders Transport Union to leave Drivers Association alone. Barrow congratulates Senegal on 63rd independence anniversary. Gambia Revenue Authority attributes $1.5 billion in collection to staff commitment. New GRTS DG, following brouhaha about the appointment of the state's broadcaster, Gambia Radio and Television Services, it has finally been confirmed that the state broadcaster has a new Director General in the name of Abdullah C, who is a staff of the broadcaster. Let's move on to the Fourier newspaper. And the Fourier newspaper's lead story has to do with the upcoming local government elections, and it reads, IEC Vice Chairman warns candidates to respect campaign code of ethics of the Gambia. UNESCO NATCOM discussed freedom of expression, security of journalists with members of the judiciary. Now, the Fourier also published a story on the collection of $1.5 billion by the Gambia Revenue Authority, and this same story actually fooled the Point newspaper with a huge photo of Yankuba Dabo, the Director General of GRA, and their lead story reads, GRA collects 1.5 billion revenue. Just like the other newspapers, GRTS gets new Director General. That's another story. This other story as well reads, Barrow congratulates Senegal on 63rd independent anniversary. NEA Executive Director urges sound chemical management to protect lives. This one reads, Court admits purported operational plan as evidence. Barrow's Chief of Staff rebutes $300 million electricity payment claim to Senegal. Finally, let's move on to the Voice newspaper, whose lead story has to do with also the upcoming local government elections, and reads, EWC report confirms low number of rejected candidates. Prosecution witness says communication printed copy contains telephone number of alleged coup plotters ringleader. And North Bank regional authorities sensitize Al Kalulu on peaceful local government elections. Let's take a look at the back page of the Standard newspaper, that's the sports, and it reads, Gambia picks team for African Youth Athletics Championship. GA takes 24 athletes to fly Gambia's flag in Zambia. I'm afraid these are the major stories making headlines here in Banjul, and it's back to you in the studio.
Thank you, Sankwele Janko, for that newspaper review.
Politics, analysis on major news, social matters, and all. This is A Guest.
Our guest this afternoon, a Ghanaian political analyst, examines the call by the opposition party National Democratic Congress NDC of Ghana on the ruling government New Patriotic Party NPP to come clean and be honest with the true economic state of the country. The national chairman of the ruling government has responded to them, saying Ghana's economic downturn is clearly due to the COVID-19 pandemic and Russia-Ukraine war, and touted the measures the ruling government is taking to save the country. Ebo Jebi, who is our guest in this interview, will assess the fact and reality of the socio-political space of Ghana and share his opinion on the voting pattern that will decide which party comes to office come December 2024 elections in Ghana. He tells us more.
Well, we've never had a very healthy political space for a minute. And when I say a minute, I mean for the longest time. Because of this seriously polarized partisan politics that we've had since 1993, somehow we've managed as a people to really divide ourselves along these political party lines. That is very, very unhealthy for any kind of progress or development for the nation. It's almost become tribal, where followers or supporters or members of the NDC, the National Democratic Congress, or the National Patriotic Party, I don't know if they've been so indoctrinated or they've been hoodwinked to think that you have to belong to a political party to do anything better for the nation Ghana. Mm-hmm. And so when issues of national interest come up, we don't have the very balanced space to actually discuss the issues to the benefit of the nation at large. So when my party is in power, I sing a different tune. And when I'm in opposition, I sing a different tune.
All right, so based on reports, Ghana is reaching a staff-level agreement with IMF for its debt restructuring and even pleading with China to offload the debt burden they owe them. Do you see this approach as a double standard by the ruling New Patriotic Party, protesting against the same measure by the previous administration?
Yes, it's more than double standard. Yes, it's very disappointing that, the interesting thing is we have audios and all sorts of medium that the NPP in opposition chastised the NDC in administration at the time. I remember there was a quote that said, borrowing to run a nation is a lazy man's approach to governance. And then you get the opportunity to come into it and you do even far worse. What's even more dire or very disheartening is the level of spending. I mean, I always try to reduce every situation to a personal level. If you go into a bank to acquire a loan and you spend the money frivolously, why would you expect the bank to write off the loan and have you go scot-free? We go for loans to develop our people, but then we end up spending too much more money than we make ourselves. It doesn't mean that businesses are never in the red, but they have something to show for. If you look at the balance sheet, you can tell that there's something that the monies have been invested into. And by and by, you can recoup, your investment. But in our situation, if you look at our level of spending, the size of the current administration, and all the frills that come with their offices, you can tell that we're not very judicious with the spending of monies that we take from other sovereignties. So it's very disappointing and disheartening that we would ask anybody to forgive us our loans when we can't even justify what we use the loans for.
All right, so finally, what observatory measure do you project voters to consider looking at the socio-economic situation of Ghana currently come December 2024 elections?
I don't foresee anything different. We're still going to go along those two lines, NPP, NDC. What I foresee is maybe voter apathy. It appears that with the happenings in the parliament right now, followers of the two main political parties are really going to be indifferent when it comes to 2024 election. Because you saw what happened in the parliament when the opposition NDC had made so much noise about not approving the president's nominees. But at the end of the day, somehow they got nominated. And the NDC national executive were, up in arms that they were going to investigate the MPs that voted in favor. In one interview, I told them, if I were an advisor to the NDC leadership, I would tell them not to embark on those wild goose chases. You're really going to just split your party along those lines. And come the election time, you'll probably end up with more independent candidates running against your, selected prospective MPs. So I can see that when it gets to the election 2024, members or followers of the MPP and NDC, our turnout to the polls, I project, will be very, very disappointing.
Ebujebi is a political analyst in Ghana. Now to some sports update. The draw has been completed for inaugural CAF African Schools Football Championship final ahead of the tournament, which is set to kick off on Wednesday in Durban, South Africa. We have come to the end of this edition of Newslink from West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM. Thank you for listening, and many thanks to our listeners in the Gambia via Hot 104.3 FM and in Liberia via Alternative Youth Radio 98.9 FM Lofa County, and in Ghana Royals FM 104.7. Wenchi Inyas Bilimu has been on the console. Many thanks to Mustafa Sek for our social media coverage. Do interact with us via our social media platforms on Twitter and Instagram at WADR News, and on Facebook, West Africa Democracy Radio English Service. Coming up at the bottom of the hour, WADR's gender program in English, 50-50 with Atiawin and Bella Lawson. I am James Ejapon. Good afternoon.
News, talk, music, get it all 24 hours on West Africa Democracy Radio 94.9 FM Dakar.